The machine had scanned 10,000 species across the spiral arm of the galaxy, and somehow, it chose a human. The wind over the red plains of Kestris sounded like dry paper tearing across metal. Daniel Hayes barely looked up from the cracked engine housing beneath his hands. The salvage crawler's power relay had been fried by a sandstorm the night before, and without it the vehicle was nothing more than 20 tons of dead steel baking under a pale orange sun. Daniel wiped grease across his forehead with the back of his glove and squinted at the horizon. Miles of rust-colored dust rolled like a slow ocean under the heat. 92 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing. Just another quiet afternoon on the edge of nowhere. The comm unit on his belt suddenly chirped once, sharp and artificial, a sound he hadn't heard in months. Daniel frowned. Nobody called a freelance salvage mechanic on an unregistered rock like this. He lifted the device, brushing sand from the cracked screen. The message wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language he knew. Lines of alien glyphs flickered across the display, rearranging themselves like living code. Then the screen went white. A calm synthetic voice replaced the desert wind. Compatibility confirmed. Daniel blinked. Yeah, wrong number, he muttered, reaching to shut it off. The voice continued, emotionless. Subject identified. Species classification, human. Genetic alignment, viable. The air suddenly hummed. Not from his crawler. From the sky. Daniel looked up just as a silver streak tore across the clouds, silent and impossibly fast. For a moment it looked like a falling star. Then the star grew larger. Much larger. The object pierced the thin atmosphere without flame or smoke, gliding rather than crashing. It vanished behind a ridge of jagged basalt 2 miles away, followed by a deep tremor that rolled through the ground like distant thunder. Daniel stared at the horizon. Well, that's new. The comm device spoke again. Bond candidate located within operational radius. Daniel frowned harder. Bond candidate. The wind shifted, carrying something unfamiliar across the sand. Not smoke. Not fuel. Something cooler, like charged air before a lightning strike. Curiosity won the argument inside his head. He climbed into the crawler, coaxed the damaged engine to life with a reluctant growl, and steered toward the ridge. The trip took 15 minutes over broken ground and shallow dunes. When he crested the basalt ridge, the world on the other side looked different. The sand had melted into smooth glass for nearly 50 yards, reflecting the sky like a warped mirror. At the center of it all rested a spacecraft unlike anything Daniel had seen in 10 years of salvage work. The hull curved like liquid mercury, perfectly smooth, half buried in the glassy crater it had created. No scorch marks. No broken panels. Just silent power humming beneath the metal. Daniel cut the engine and climbed out slowly. Okay, somebody's gonna pay a lot for this. The ship responded. A section of the hull opened with a whisper. Cool blue light spilled across the sand. And inside the chamber, lying against a crystalline support frame, was a woman who was not human. Her skin shimmered a soft shade of blue beneath the light. Silver hair drifted weightlessly around her shoulders as if gravity had forgotten her. A crown-like device rested against her temples, glowing faintly. Her eyes opened the moment Daniel stepped closer. Bright. Luminous. Not afraid. Just studying him. The device on Daniel's belt chimed once more. Ritual partner located. The woman's voice was calm but weak, carrying a quiet authority that made the desert feel suddenly smaller. Human, she said slowly, as though tasting the word for the first time. Her gaze locked onto his. You arrived sooner than expected. Daniel stared at the alien princess lying inside a fallen starship in the middle of a desert no one else knew existed. Then he pointed at himself. Hold on, he said carefully. You're telling me I was expected? Daniel Hayes lowered his hand slowly, still staring at the blue-skinned woman resting inside the glowing chamber. The wind across the glass desert whispered against the hull of the ship, carrying grains of sand that clicked softly against the smooth metal. For a moment neither of them moved. Daniel felt the strange hum in the air again, like distant electricity crawling across his skin. "Expected is a strong word," he said carefully. "I was fixing a broken engine 5 minutes ago." The alien woman studied him with calm precision, her luminous eyes reflecting the pale sky beyond the open hull. "Your arrival was predicted by the ritual instrument," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "It searched for the closest compatible consciousness." Daniel looked down at the small communicator in his hand. The cracked screen flickered once more as if listening to the conversation. "So this thing called me here," he said. "I did not summon you personally," she answered. "But the ritual did." Daniel exhaled slowly and stepped closer to the edge of the chamber. The air inside the ship felt cooler than the desert outside, almost refreshing after the dry heat. He noticed thin lines of soft light running along the curved walls, pulsing with a rhythm that felt strangely alive. The woman's silver hair drifted slightly with each pulse as if the ship itself was breathing. "Let me guess," Daniel said. "You are royalty, your ship crashed, and somehow I am the last guy within driving distance." The woman watched him another second before answering. "Your summary is inefficient but accurate." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck and looked around the quiet crater. 2 miles of empty desert surrounded them in every direction. No rescue teams. No patrol drones. Nothing but wind and glassed sand. "All right," he said slowly. "Start explaining." The woman shifted slightly within the crystalline support frame. The crown-shaped device on her temples brightened, projecting faint patterns of light across the chamber walls. "My name is Seralith," she said. "I am heir to the Orethian throne." Daniel let out a soft whistle. "Princess. Of course you are." Seralith ignored the sarcasm and continued. "My species survives through an ancient rite known as the convergence. Each generation the royal successor must form a neural bond with a compatible life form outside our own kind." Daniel blinked. "Outside your species?" "Correct." "And your machine picked me?" "Yes." Daniel looked at the communicator again as if expecting it to apologize. It remained silent. Seralith's voice softened slightly. "Without the bond my neural system will destabilize within 72 hours. The rite is not ceremonial. It is biological." Daniel leaned against the edge of the chamber, thinking. 72 hours. 3 days. He glanced at the glowing crown device resting against her temples. "So what exactly does this bond do?" he asked. Seralith's eyes met his again. For the first time there was a trace of uncertainty in them. "It connects 2 minds long enough for our species to adapt, learn, and survive." Daniel considered that answer while the desert wind moved slowly across the glassed sand outside the ship. Then he folded his arms and gave a small skeptical smile. "All right, Princess," he said. "Let us say I believe this. What happens if your royal ritual picked the wrong mechanic?" Seralith looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Then both of us will discover the consequences together." Daniel Hayes remained leaning against the edge of the chamber while the quiet hum of alien machinery pulsed softly through the ship. The wind outside continued sliding across the glass desert like distant waves across a frozen ocean. For several seconds he simply stared at Princess Seralith, trying to decide whether this was the strangest day of his life or the start of a very expensive mistake. "All right," Daniel said slowly, lifting both hands in surrender. "Let us assume this ritual of yours is real." He glanced at the crown-shaped device glowing faintly beside her temples. "What exactly happens during this bond?" Seralith followed his gaze toward the device. The soft light from it reflected across her blue skin in shifting patterns. "The convergence crown creates a temporary neural bridge," she explained. 2 minds share sensory and emotional pathways for a controlled period of time. The process allows my biology to adapt to external genetic variation. Daniel raised one eyebrow. In normal English? Sarilith watched him carefully before answering again. It allows my species to learn from others. Daniel let out a quiet breath and looked around the chamber once more. The interior of the ship felt strangely calm, like the inside of a cathedral built from light and metal instead of stone. Nothing looked broken despite the dramatic landing outside. So the royal tradition of your entire civilization depends on linking minds with someone random, he said. That seems like a risky system. The instrument does not choose randomly, Sarilith replied. It searches for compatibility across multiple biological and psychological parameters. Daniel gave a small laugh. Then that machine has a strange definition of compatibility. The crown device pulsed once, brighter this time, and a faint ring of light expanded across the chamber floor. Sarilith's expression grew more serious. The ritual has already begun preparing the connection, she said quietly. Daniel straightened slightly. Preparing? Yes. The ship responded as if confirming her words. Panels of soft light along the curved walls brightened one by one. The air felt warmer, filled with a faint electric pressure that made the hairs on Daniel's arms stand up. He looked toward the open hull and then back to the princess. Is this the part where something dramatic happens? He asked. Sarilith slowly lifted one hand from the crystalline frame supporting her. The movement looked controlled but clearly required effort. The convergence crown cannot activate unless both participants are willing, she said. Your consent is required. Daniel stared at her hand for a moment, then at the glowing device. His life until this morning had been simple. Repair broken machines. Sell scrap. Avoid trouble. Now an alien princess was calmly explaining that the survival of her species required linking minds with a salvage mechanic from Earth. He shook his head with a quiet sigh. You know, he said, when I woke up today the most complicated thing on my schedule was a blown fuel injector. Sarilith studied his face carefully, as if measuring something deeper than his words. You may refuse, she said. If you leave now, the ritual will fail and I will accept the outcome. Daniel glanced toward the open desert again. The crawler waited on the ridge above the crater, still running, ready to drive away. The horizon stretched empty for miles beneath the pale sky. No witnesses. No expectations. Just a choice. After a long moment he looked back at the alien princess and stepped closer to the chamber. 72 hours, right? He said. Sarilith nodded once. Daniel extended his hand toward hers with a crooked half-smile. All right, princess, he said quietly. Let us see what your ancient alien ritual thinks it found in a human mechanic. Daniel Hayes felt the moment their hands touched before he saw the light. Sarilith's fingers were cool against his palm, lighter than he expected, almost weightless. For a brief second nothing happened. The chamber remained quiet except for the slow pulse of the ship's systems. Then the convergence crown reacted. The device on Sarilith's temples brightened with a sudden glow, thin lines of silver light spreading across its curved surface like frost forming across glass. A soft vibration traveled through the crystalline frame beneath her and into the metal floor under Daniel's boots. He frowned. I guess that means it noticed, he said. Sarilith did not answer immediately. Her eyes had closed for a moment as the crown released a faint ring of pale energy that expanded outward like a ripple across still water. When the light reached Daniel, he felt it pass through him without heat or pain. It felt more like a sudden change in gravity, subtle but unmistakable. He inhaled slowly. That is, different. Sarilith opened her eyes again. The glow from the crown reflected in them like distant stars. The bridge is forming, she said quietly. Daniel tilted his head. Bridge? Before she could explain, the sensation deepened. At first it was only a flicker at the edge of his thoughts. A faint impression that did not belong to him. Not a voice. Not exactly a memory. More like the feeling of standing in a place he had never visited. Cool air. Smooth metal corridors. The quiet weight of responsibility pressing on someone's shoulders. Daniel blinked and shook his head slightly. The desert returned to focus around him. Okay, he muttered. Now that definitely was not my imagination. Across from him Saralitha's expression had changed as well. She watched him with something new in her eyes. Not authority. Not suspicion. Something closer to curiosity. I can sense fragments of your perception, she said softly. Daniel folded his free hand against the edge of the chamber. Let me guess. Desert heat. Broken machines. Probably a lot of poor life decisions. Saralith studied him carefully, her silver hair drifting slightly in the quiet air. I sense determination, she corrected. And patience. Daniel gave a small skeptical smile. You might want to keep looking. There is also a lot of stubbornness in there. The crown pulsed again, brighter this time. The soft light spread across the chamber walls, reflecting off the curved metal surfaces like ripples in a pool. The pressure in the air increased slightly, enough that Daniel felt it behind his eyes. The connection was growing stronger. This time the sensation moved in the opposite direction. Daniel suddenly felt something he knew was not his own emotion. A steady calm that carried an enormous weight beneath it. Discipline. Years of training. The quiet loneliness of someone raised to lead an entire civilization. He exhaled slowly. Princess, he said carefully, I think I just felt what it is like to be you for about half a second. Saralith did not look surprised. She only watched him with growing focus. That is the purpose of the convergence, she explained. Understanding without words. Outside the open hull the wind shifted again, sweeping sand across the glassed crater with a whispering sound like distant rain. Daniel glanced toward the horizon and then back to the alien princess whose hand still rested in his. Well, he said after a moment, if this thing keeps sharing thoughts both ways, I should probably warn you. Saralith raised one eyebrow slightly. Warn me. Daniel gave a quiet shrug. Human minds are messy places. The crown responded with another pulse of light, as if the ancient alien device had already decided that was exactly why it had chosen him. The connection did not fade after the light settled. Daniel Hayes slowly released his grip from the edge of the chamber, but he did not pull his hand away from Saralith. The convergence crown continued to glow softly above her temples, sending quiet pulses of silver light across the smooth interior walls of the ship. The sensation in Daniel's mind was still there. Faint. Subtle. Like a second heartbeat somewhere behind his thoughts. Not loud enough to control him. Just present. He looked down at their joined hands and then back at her. So this is the part where our brains start trading secrets, he asked quietly. Saralith tilted her head slightly, observing him with growing interest. Not secrets, she said. Perception. Daniel exhaled slowly. The desert wind outside brushed across the open hull again, carrying warm air through the chamber. Yet inside he felt something else. A different awareness layered beneath his own senses. He suddenly noticed how steady Saralitha's breathing was. How controlled. How disciplined. It was the rhythm of someone trained since childhood to remain calm even when the entire universe expected perfection. And then the feeling shifted. Saralith felt it too. Daniel sensed her attention sharpen through the link as a series of unfamiliar impressions moved across her mind. Images that were not hers. A small repair garage on Earth. The smell of motor oil and hot metal. Long hours spent fixing machines that other people had already given up on. The quiet satisfaction of solving a problem with his own hands. Saralitha's eyes widened slightly. Your life has been practical, she said. Daniel chuckled under his breath. That is one polite way to say it. The crown pulsed again, and this time the shared awareness deepened just a little more. Daniel suddenly felt a memory that was not his own. Vast halls of polished crystal. Tall windows looking out over. A city that floated above an ocean of silver clouds. Rows of alien advisors standing in perfect silence while a young princess learned how to carry the weight of a civilization before she was old enough to understand it. Daniel blinked and shook his head slowly. "You grew up in a palace the size of a small state," he said. Sarilith watched him carefully. "You experienced that?" "Yeah," he replied. "And now I feel underdressed." For the first time a faint hint of amusement touched the corner of her expression. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The crown responded to that emotional shift with another soft ring of light spreading across the floor. The connection was stabilizing. Daniel glanced toward the open desert again. The sun had moved slightly across the sky, lowering just enough to cast long shadows across the glassed crater. Time was passing. 72 hours suddenly felt much shorter than it had before. He looked back at Sarilith. "Tell me something," he said. "When your ancient royal machine searched the galaxy for a compatible partner, it had to check millions of species." Sarilith nodded slowly. "Yes." Daniel scratched the side of his head thoughtfully. "Then I have to ask the obvious question." She waited. Daniel gave a small crooked smile. "Why did it choose a human mechanic from the middle of nowhere?" Sarilith was quiet for a moment. The crown flickered gently as if considering the same question. When she finally answered, her voice carried a tone of thoughtful curiosity that had not been there before. "I believe," she said slowly, "the ritual searches for minds capable of adaptation." Daniel raised one eyebrow. "And humans are good at that?" Sarilith looked directly into his eyes through the soft silver light. "Your memories suggest that surviving difficulty is something your species practices often." Daniel leaned back slightly and gave a quiet laugh. "Princess," he said, "that might be the most accurate description of humanity anyone has ever come up with." The crown pulsed again, brighter this time, as if the ancient alien device had quietly reached the same conclusion. The silver glow of the convergence crown softened into a steady rhythm, like a calm pulse echoing through the ship's quiet interior. Daniel Hayes slowly released his grip on the edge of the chamber and stepped half a pace back, though his hand still rested loosely in Sarilith's. The strange shared awareness between their minds had not disappeared. If anything, it had settled into something more stable. Not overwhelming. Just present, like a second set of eyes somewhere behind his own thoughts. Daniel rolled his shoulders once, trying to adjust to the sensation. "Okay," he said quietly, glancing around the curved chamber walls, "this is officially the strangest repair job I have ever taken." Sarilith watched him with calm curiosity. The silver light from the crown reflected softly across her blue skin, giving her an almost luminous presence inside the dim chamber. "Your reaction is within expected parameters," she said. Daniel gave a short laugh. "Princess, you might want to check your expectations again. Humans do not normally wake up, fix a broken engine, and end the day sharing thoughts with alien royalty." The crown responded with another faint pulse, and the shared awareness shifted again. This time the sensation moved more smoothly between them, like two streams slowly learning how to merge without turbulence. Sarilith suddenly felt something new through the connection. A memory from Daniel's mind that carried warmth instead of hardship. A summer evening on Earth. The hum of old ceiling fans inside a small roadside diner. The smell of fresh coffee and fried potatoes drifting through the air while tired workers laughed around a table after a long day. Sarilith blinked slowly. "Your species gathers like this often?" she asked. Daniel tilted his head. "You mean eating cheap food and complaining about life?" "Yes. All the time," he said with a small smile. "It is how humans stay sane." Sarilith absorbed the thought quietly. The concept seemed simple, yet unfamiliar. Through the bond Daniel could feel her trying to understand something deeper than the surface of the memory. A sense of belonging that did not require titles or authority. Just people sharing time together. The crown brightened slightly as if recording the emotional exchange. Daniel noticed the change and glanced at the device. "That thing seems very interested in our conversation," he said. "The Convergence Crown records adaptive insights," Seralith explained. "Each bond strengthens the evolutionary stability of my species." Daniel nodded slowly, though another thought was forming in the back of his mind. He looked toward the open hull again. The sun had dropped lower in the sky, turning the desert light into deep orange reflections across the glassed crater. The quiet landscape looked peaceful, but something about the horizon made him uneasy. Not danger exactly. Just the feeling that this moment of calm would not last forever. He turned back toward Seralith. "You said your ship came down because something interrupted your journey," he said. Seralith's expression grew slightly more serious. "Yes." The shared awareness carried a brief flash of her earlier memory. Navigation alarms. The ship shifting course unexpectedly. Systems rerouting power toward the Convergence Crown instead of the engines. Daniel frowned. "So your own ritual device forced the landing?" "Correct," she replied. "The bond had to begin immediately." Daniel crossed his arms thoughtfully and looked once more at the glowing crown resting against her temples. "That machine must really trust its calculations," he said. Seralith met his gaze through the quiet silver light. "It selected you with absolute certainty." Daniel let out a slow breath and glanced toward the endless desert beyond the hull. Then he looked back at the alien princess whose thoughts were now quietly touching his own. "Well," he said, his voice calm but thoughtful, "I guess we are about to find out if ancient alien technology knows what it is doing." The crown pulsed again, steady and confident, as if it had never doubted the answer. The desert outside the open hull had grown quieter as the sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon. Long amber shadows stretched across the glassed crater, turning the smooth surface into a mirror that reflected the darkening sky. Inside the alien vessel the steady glow of the Convergence Crown continued to pulse gently above Seralith's temples, its silver light moving in calm rhythms that echoed through Daniel Hayes's thoughts like a distant signal. Daniel stood near the edge of the chamber for a moment, looking out across the silent plains of Kestris, for something about the stillness felt different now. Not threatening. Just aware. As if the universe had noticed that something important had begun inside this fallen starship. He turned back toward Seralith, rubbing his hands together slowly as if adjusting to the lingering sensation of the neural bridge between them. "You know," he said, glancing around the softly glowing chamber, "I have fixed a lot of machines in my life." Seralith watched him carefully. "And?" Daniel gestured toward the crown resting against her temples. "And none of them ever decided who I was supposed to share my brain with." The faintest hint of amusement passed through the shared connection between them. Seralith did not laugh, but the emotional echo of her curiosity touched Daniel's mind clearly enough. "Your species values independence," she said. Daniel nodded once. "We do." The crown pulsed again, and with it came another quiet exchange of perception. This time Daniel felt something sharper in Seralith's thoughts. Not fear. Something closer to anticipation. A sense that the ritual had moved beyond its fragile beginning and was now entering a more important stage. Seralith lifted her hand slightly, studying the faint glow that shimmered across her fingertips. "The neural bridge is stabilizing," she said softly. "Our minds are adapting to one another more quickly than expected." Daniel leaned his shoulder against the curved wall of the chamber and crossed his arms. "Is that good news or complicated news?" Seralith looked at him directly. "Both." Daniel let out a quiet breath through his nose. "That sounds about right." The desert wind outside shifted again, carrying a colder current of air through the open hull. The change in temperature made Daniel glance toward the horizon once more. The sky was beginning to darken, the orange light fading into deep violet above the distant ridges. Night on this world would arrive soon. Through the bond he felt Sarilith noticed the same change in the environment. Her thoughts brushed against his awareness, calm but attentive. Your body is reacting to the cooling atmosphere, she observed. Daniel shrugged lightly. That is what happens when a human stands in the open desert for too long. The connection responded with another pulse of shared awareness, deeper this time. Daniel suddenly felt something from Sarilith that had nothing to do with the ritual itself. A quiet realization forming in her thoughts. The princess of an ancient alien civilization had expected the convergence to be a controlled, formal process inside a palace chamber surrounded by advisors and scholars. Instead she had found herself bonded to a human mechanic standing barefoot in desert dust beside a broken salvage crawler. Daniel felt the contrast clearly through the link. He smiled faintly. Not exactly the royal ceremony you imagined, huh? Sarilith's silver eyes remained steady on his. No, she admitted quietly. The crown brightened slightly as the emotional honesty passed between them. Daniel pushed himself away from the wall and stepped closer to the chamber again. For what it is worth, he said calmly, humans are pretty good at adapting to situations that do not go according to plan. Sarilith studied him through the soft silver light. Yes, she said after a moment. I am beginning to understand that. Outside the ship the last edge of sunlight slipped behind the distant ridge, and the desert fell into twilight. Inside the chamber the convergence crown glowed brighter against the gathering darkness, as if the ancient device recognized that the most important part of the bond had only just begun. The first stars appeared above the desert just as the last color drained from the horizon. Night on Kestris, for arrived quickly, swallowing the red plains beneath a vast sky filled with distant points of white light. Inside the silent alien vessel the convergence crown glowed brighter against the darkness, its silver pulse now steady and strong. Daniel Hayes stood near the open hull, watching the temperature gauge on his worn wrist unit drop slowly as the desert cooled. 80 degrees. Then 75. The heat of the day was fading fast. Behind him the chamber hummed softly with alien energy, and somewhere inside that quiet hum he could still feel the gentle presence of Sarilith's thoughts touching the edge of his own. It was no longer startling. Just unfamiliar. Like hearing a distant voice through a thin wall. Daniel glanced back toward the princess. She remained within the crystalline support frame, though her posture looked stronger now than it had earlier. The crown's light traced faint patterns along the chamber walls as it continued processing the neural bridge between them. So, Daniel said slowly, folding his arms while he studied the strange device resting on her temples, this ritual of yours is still running. Sarilith nodded once. Yes. Through the connection Daniel felt the quiet certainty behind her answer. The convergence was no longer fragile. It had passed some invisible threshold. The process was now moving forward on its own. Daniel stepped a little closer to the chamber again, boots echoing softly across the smooth metal floor. Then I guess the big question is what happens next. Sarilith was silent for a moment, and Daniel sensed something complex moving through her thoughts. It was not fear. More like the awareness of a truth she had only just begun to understand. Finally she spoke. The final stage of the ritual is integration. Daniel raised one eyebrow. Integration? Yes, Sarilith replied. When the neural bridge becomes fully stable, the convergence crown completes its purpose. It merges adaptive insights from both minds and alters the royal genetic structure accordingly. Daniel blinked. Hold on. He pointed gently toward the glowing crown. You are telling me that machine rewrites your biology based on whatever it learns from me? Sarilith met his gaze calmly. That is correct. Daniel let out a quiet breath and looked toward the dark desert outside. A cool breeze drifted across the crater, carrying the dry scent of sand and distant stone. The stars above the horizon seemed impossibly bright in the clear alien sky. Well, he murmured, that explains why it insisted on starting the ritual immediately. The crown pulsed again, brighter than before. The sensation inside Daniel's mind deepened suddenly, as if a door had opened somewhere inside the connection. This time the exchange was not only memories. It was perspective. Seralith felt something profound inside Daniel's thoughts. A simple human belief that had shaped much of his life. The idea that no matter how broken something looked, there was always a way to repair it if someone cared enough to try. The realization moved through her awareness like a quiet wave. Daniel felt her reaction immediately through the link. "You felt that," he said softly. Seralith nodded slowly. "Yes." The crown responded with another luminous pulse that spread across the chamber like ripples of light. The ritual was approaching its completion. Daniel rested one hand on the edge of the chamber, his voice calm despite the strange moment unfolding around them. "Princess," he said, glancing toward her through the silver glow, "if your ancient machine just added human stubbornness to your royal DNA, your entire empire might be in for a surprise." For the first time since the bond had begun, Seralith allowed a small smile to appear. "Perhaps," she said quietly. Outside the vessel the desert remained silent beneath the endless stars, while inside the fallen ship the Convergence crown continued to glow brighter, preparing to finish a ritual that neither human nor alien had truly expected. The Convergence crown reached its brightest point just after midnight. Outside the fallen vessel the desert of Kestris, rested beneath a deep black sky filled with unfamiliar constellations, their distant light reflecting softly across the glassed crater that surrounded the ship like a frozen ocean. Inside the chamber the silver glow from the ancient device filled every corner with quiet radiance. Daniel Hayes stood beside the crystalline frame, one hand resting lightly against the cool metal surface while the other hung loosely at his side. The connection inside his mind had grown deeper during the past several minutes, not louder or more overwhelming, but clearer. The presence of Seralith's thoughts no longer felt like a foreign signal. It felt natural, as if two different melodies had finally learned how to move within the same rhythm. The crown pulsed once more and then slowly began to dim. Daniel noticed the change immediately. "That looks important," he said softly. Seralith remained perfectly still inside the chamber as the final stage of the ritual unfolded. Through the bond Daniel felt the shift happening within her biology, a quiet cascade of adjustments guided by the ancient technology resting on her temples. The device was completing its purpose. It had gathered what it needed from both of them. After several seconds the chamber lights faded to their normal soft glow. The crown released a final gentle pulse and then separated from Seralith's head with a smooth mechanical movement. The silver arcs folded inward and returned to their resting position above the frame. Silence followed. Real silence. The steady hum of the ritual system was gone. Only the quiet breathing of the ship's life support remained. Daniel blinked once and rubbed the back of his neck. The connection between them had changed again. It was still there, but lighter now. Stable. Like a quiet bridge instead of an open floodgate. Seralith slowly stepped forward out of the chamber for the first time since the ritual had begun. Her movements were calm and steady. The faint silver patterns that once glowed along her skin had faded, leaving only the natural blue tone of her species illuminated by the soft interior lights. She looked at Daniel carefully, studying him with the same thoughtful expression she had shown when they first met. Yet something in her gaze had changed. Understanding. Daniel shifted his weight slightly and gave a small uncertain smile. "So," he said, glancing briefly toward the silent crown above them, "did your royal machine get what it needed?" Seralith considered the question for a moment. Through the bond Daniel felt the answer forming even before she spoke. "Yes," she said quietly. Daniel exhaled in relief. "Good. Because I was starting to worry it might ask me to take a written test or something." A faint warmth passed through their shared awareness. Not quite laughter, but close enough. Seralith stepped closer to the open hull where the night air drifted into the chamber. Together they looked out across the endless desert beneath the stars. For a moment neither of them spoke. The galaxy stretched above them in silent brilliance. Finally Seralith turned slightly toward him. Your species carries a remarkable trait, she said. Daniel glanced sideways at her. Only one. She ignored the joke gently. You continue forward even when uncertainty surrounds you. Daniel shrugged. That is called being human. The quiet connection between their minds echoed with understanding. The ancient ritual had searched across the stars for a compatible mind. It had found one in a place no royal scholar would ever have predicted. A mechanic standing alone in a distant desert. Seralith looked back toward the constellations overhead, her voice calm but certain. My people believed survival required strength, she said softly. Tonight the ritual discovered something greater. Daniel followed her gaze into the endless sky. What is that? He asked. Seralith answered without hesitation. Humanity. The wind outside carried a soft whisper across the crater while two very different beings stood quietly beneath the stars,